Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving, where we're putting human back in human capital solutions. On today's episode, we're going to hear from an industry leader where they're sharing their thoughts, feedback, and perspective on what's happening in today's world of work. Well, let's stay tuned and perk our ears up for another exciting episode. Well, welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving. I'm excited. We're excited today to welcome Dr. Cameron Trenor to the podcast. Cameron is a chief medical officer at Cellarity, where he was the very first physician hired to help shape the medical leadership function from the ground up. Cameron's a board-certified pediatric hematologist oncologist who continues to see patients at Boston Children's Hospital, and he also serves as an instructor in pediatrics at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Cameron's career spans leadership roles at companies like Pharma Therapeutics and Novartis, where he worked across hematology and rare disease programs. Beyond his executive work, Cameron has an impressive research background, authoring dozens of publications in areas such as vascular anomalies, pediatric stroke, and hematology. His passion lies in generating evidence that truly changes clinical practice, bridging the worlds of patient care, translational research, and biotech innovation. Cameron, we are thrilled to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks so much, Darren. Excited to be here.
Well, Cameron, throughout the time that we've gotten a chance to connect, I've been able to glean a lot from our conversations and just tracking Cellarity as well in your career, as previously mentioned. And I mentioned in the introduction how you have, as I think our audience would infer, affinity for research focused and evidence-based medicine. And Cameron, you've emphasized the importance of evidence-based medicine and generating the data that actually shifts practice. So I'm curious, and I'm sure our audience is, how has your experience as both a clinician and researcher shaped the way you approach evidence-based decision-making in drug development?
Yeah, sure. That's a comprehensive question. I think some of this comes from how I was trained. So I started in the laboratory, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be a scientist or a physician or both. And I really loved the science, the deep, pure scientific thinking, but I needed a why. I needed connectivity to the patients and the questions that mattered. And that led me onto a physician track where I get to still explore as a scientist. And so that, I think those roots are important. I also trained in a very academic medical setting where not only is evidence-based medicine the standard, but most of my peers and mentors and therefore myself really value being at the cutting edge of what's new and not just doing what the last trials or the only approved therapies bring forward. So wanting to be on the cutting edge, I think, led my career a lot in a translational direction. Wanting to do the research that asks tomorrow's question and make tomorrow's care different and better. And I think drug development is that, right? So I transitioned from full-time academic medicine to industry because I wanted to answer questions on a larger scale. I wanted to do bigger trials and try to affect diseases at a level that you can't do at a few patients at a time. So I think all of those, for me, contribute to how I think about evidence-based medicine.
Yeah, and I think it's a great perspective. I think one of the things Darren and I love most about supporting clients in this industry is getting to know the personal whys and the personal stories and the tenacious hunger for more and better, right? That never settling on a status quo, but understanding, holistically from a patient perspective, especially, right, that there really is that there's better ways do it than where we are today and seeking those things out. I think it's fascinating and similarly, I'm sure making a pivot from academia into industry, and then now making a pivot from larger industry like a Novartis into being the first physician in at a small company like Celarity, when you weren't stepping directly into that CMO role, but you came in as the first physician hire, essentially functioning as that executive before you're officially titled in that executive type of role. What was it like to really shape the medical side of the organization from the ground up from the beginning?
Yeah, so maybe one another background thing about me to frame this. I think I get bored easily and I run from boredom. So it doesn't look like a linear career because it definitely wasn't drawn out as one. But I've always sought a challenge with a learner's mentality. So that has, I think, driven most of my transitions. And I did leave a wonderful experience at Novartis because I wanted to try biotech and the pace of biotech and the chaos of biotech. Um, and I had a spectacular experience at Forma, where the culture was great, the people was great, the science was great, the trials were great. And Celarity for me was an opportunity to do two things. One is come in as a first physician and build a function. So I'm getting to your question, I promise. And then the second was, we have a platform that has breadth across hematology, which is great because I'm comfortable there, but beyond hematology. So it lets me exercise my skill set. Because at the end of the day, you're valued as a specialist, but you're more valuable as a generalist. So in terms of building the team here and how I thought about that, I loved the challenge of that. What matters in small organizations and small teams is going to sound like a real estate quote spun around because I think it is, but it's people, people, people. If you get great people that you like to solve problems with and be in the trenches with, you're gonna be just fine. If you think you found the unicorn person to solve all your problems, you've set them on a pedestal for disappointment. So I like to solve problems. I find people who like to solve problems, who bring different perspectives and skill sets, and who love to challenge me. And if that's how you build teams, I think that's a pretty good recipe. The rest is somewhat detailed. And then I think first physician in is a great opportunity, right? It's a little overwhelming. The organization was not um, trained on what to do with a physician perspective, so I had to find a voice. I don't struggle to find a voice, but how do you use your voice and build trust and build influence? And I think every organization goes through a period of time of is now when we need a clinician's perspective. And you can get that fractionally and through KOLs and consultants, but when do you want it in house? And I think Celarity did it at the right time for Celarity. And I think it's been a great growth experience for me. I came in as the head of translational medicine, again, using that evidence based thinking. And as the company has grown and our assets have progressed, the need from the role has grown, and that turned into a chief medical officer opportunity for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. Have you found as you've stood up the organization, and I'm sure it's still a day by day process in terms of getting everything up and going, that there were any sort of unique challenges or opportunities that you weren't quite expecting when you landed day one?
That's interesting. The answer to that is, of course, yes. But once you have the time to look back on them, they don't feel unique or surprising. You rationalize them into buckets you could have seen coming, um, right? Like not all hires go perfectly. We've changed a couple positions out. Um, the timing of growth, I think that's been an area where everybody has an opinion and nobody's right. I think we've tried pretty hard to build competencies and then land positions as full-time folks, but we've definitely stretched and struggled before we hired, and maybe we did too much of one before the other, a couple of times. um, and then in an organization, you you make your best guesses as to what you think will work. Of course, the story is everything will work, and that's never the truth. But you make your best guesses, but you got to be able. intellectually and psychologically to pivot when things change. Because data, again, if you want to really be evidence based, you got to mean it, and the data should drive what you do.
You referenced a bit of a reverse real estate quote, and I'm going to build off of that, or from engineering and perhaps architectural dynamic. Cameron, some of the strongest or most tallest buildings on the world are built on a foundation of bedrock. Having that strong bedrock, and joined Celarity. One of the many things that I know was on your docket, was on your plate, was building a team, assembling a team, which you just referenced a bit. When you stepped into Celarity, I know that you did not have a pre-existing medical leadership team. Share with us and our audience some of the things that you did. How did you go about recruiting, structuring your team, and kind of aside to that, how did you prioritize, how to build out the team? What competencies rather did you prioritize?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is a question that I asked in different words to a lot of people, relevant to the answer I'm going to give you. Um, so I think everybody who's done this has an opinion about what worked and didn't work about that way, but there's not a formula. I tried to find the formula. I haven't found a formula, because I think you have to build it right for your organization and right for you and the personality of the folks that you have in and around you. Uh, and there are leaders with opinions of, I hate to use the term building empires, but that's sort of talked about I want to build, I want X number of direct reports and X number of FTEs in my department, or this percentage of the organization. I don't come from that. And when I came in, our CEO was very the opposite of that, wanted to stay lean, and nimble. So we value in that regard, I think, we valued experience because you can stay leaner with more experience. And we valued utility players who were not extremely rigid in the confines of a job description, but liked biotech and likes to play across the lanes and work in an integrated fashion. So those were I think good, appropriate for us here at Cellarity ingredients. I did a lot of CMO networking and consultant networking of how do you build. And I just asked, the first thing is if you don't know, say you don't know. Right. So I went out, I haven't built from zero, like I'm the N of one. I haven't built like that before. And what I took from that as a theme that resonated with me and still does is decide the competency you're missing, fill that with an experienced, usually fractional role to build the position, and then hire into it. Because if you hire a great person into a vacuum to ask them to build and strategize their function and do it, and you're not really clear that that's what you want, that's an added challenge that leads to an increased failure rate at that hire. So that resonated strongly with me. So we have stood up a group in place, that has fractional support quite broadly across a medical office, who can give us literally 2 hours, 20 hours, 200 hours, to like scalable competency so that you have input, um, before you need the hire, even a year before you need the hire, but you're not blind to where you're going, or putting somebody in a position where you've made 2/3 of their decisions and then you hire them and say, here, good luck. So I think those would be framings that I learned that worked nicely, for us so far. And then you look around the organization at where is their experience and where are you weakest, and you fill those first. We knew we were headed towards our first IND. We had nobody from regulatory, had a regulatory. We had a really strong scientist internally who expressed an interest in how do the experiments we do preclinically translate into biomarkers in clinic. We got deep into that question. He's now running our biomarker program. So we translated somebody, within the translational medicine group as a scientist or biomarker lead. As we got close to clinic, we thought a lot about what's the right time that you need clinical operations. And then how do you begin to build that function out? In the beginning, for a phase one, when you're starting in healthy volunteers, you need stuff, but not a ton. But as you now start to look to go farther into a global rare disease trial, you need to build. So it's been a little bit of that philosophy. So I have a number of functions now that I have fractional use of that I know I need 6 to 12 months from now, and I'm planning. Actually, the one thing I'll fix in that sentence is the pronoun. We're planning towards that. So I don't function as the decider of how the team builds. I work with my team to talk openly about how we think it should be built. Like, sure, I get the accountability and the decision rights, but it has to make sense because again, you bring a bad apple into a great cart, you got a problem. So we're all in this together. Yeah.
I appreciate that. It certainly says a lot about your leadership. And Cameron, during your time at Novartis and Pharma, now at Cellarity, how would you define the culture within the organizations you've been in, and now in particular at Celarity? Culture is such a big buzzword and has been, but how would you best define the culture that you're fostering across your team?
So I think that as I think about this question, the challenge that I see at Celarity is a common one, which is that we're in flux. So Novartis, obviously, large organization, great infrastructure, strong leadership, strong lines of communication, good cross-functional discussions, and governance. So I learned a great regimented way at Novartis. Um, Forma was established, though early clinically when I got there. So what I mean by that is Forma started as a research organization and had made the transition to a smaller research organization developing a few programs and otherwise supporting the clinical and soon to be commercial programs. So they had transitioned from an R company to an R&D, and then a little bit louder on the development side. We're still amidst that transition. I would say at Celarity, we're brand new to development. So that probably I should have talked about in the first position in, because as development as you officially turn that page, um, attention, value generation, and spend shift in the organization. And you have to be attentive to the whole of the organization, the company's needs, who's getting less attention but is still doing great work, um, while making sure you're driving the lead asset forward. So those are nuances that are different. But I think Celarity has a great culture. It has a very interesting, almost multi-generational culture. We have some young folks who do computational work. We're an AI ML platform, so we have some first job out of your degree hires that do highly technical, spectacular science fiction level work. We have some brilliant seasoned chemists. Um, and a pretty good support team for what you would need to translate into clinic. And then we've added a clinical program onto that. So that's an interesting mix of like some folks who've been around the block for a while and some folks who are learning how to apply their brilliance. So the culture every place is different, right? Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. When you can have that peer-to-peer accountability where you can kind of connect shoulder to shoulder, but then also you can kind of reach up and glean wisdom for those that have been in industry more than yourself, or conversely, if you're kind of in those middle ranks, so to speak. So it sounds like that's a great dynamic.
I love the multi-generational example. We are seeing that growth in the the ML computational biology piece, excuse me, and to be able to blend those folks into the organization is a really cool transition point, I think, in industry right now as well. And as you put it, science fiction level is really a great descriptor for that, Cameron. I love that.
It's probably ageist when you have as much gray hair as I do. You don't want me doing computational biology. Like that's not a skill set that I learn. Um, So it does seem a little. it does seem science fiction sometimes. I think I've grown a deep appreciation for um, the out. It's sort of like what I say about projections. Projections are always right. It's the assumptions that'll get you. Um, AI is great. It's the data that it's informed by that'll get you. ML is great. It's the assumptions that'll get you. So let's talk about the assumptions you made, and then I'll totally believe what you're telling me.
It's a great perspective. You had mentioned earlier in the conversation, and I know I'm pulling this way back to three turns ago, but we talked a little bit about the balance between being a specialist and a generalist. And we talked a little bit about, you having to differentiate between that. You've worn multiple hats in industry, whether you're working in pediatric oncology, translational medicine, now into a CMO role. How do you balance your deep knowledge as a specialist in an area with the broad view required of a generalist?
I might spin that question a little bit because I think about it slightly differently, but I think I've been, let's say, lucky. Hematology in drug development is having a heyday. There's a lot going on in a way that wasn't true early in my career. So I've been able to come into industry and stay in an area of depth of comfort for me, and really apply my subject matter expertise, go toe to toe with key opinion leaders, ask different level questions, and learn to lead and develop drugs. So I think that lasts as long as it lasts, and I've enjoyed it. But I feel um, I feel a desire to exercise my skills in an area where I'm not expert, because that's when you really know you've got it, right? So that's the generalist mentality. And I'll never forget, I had a mentoring session at Novartis and ran through a rare disease program, a little 10-minute thing with a really senior person who admitted at the beginning he'd never heard of the disease, and in about 10 or 12 minutes asked the three most important questions that we've been wrestling with at the program. And I asked him how he did that, and he said it's just drug development. And we got into it, and it become, as a generalist, it becomes formulaic. If you convince me of unmet need, and you convince me that you have the right properties, pharmacologic properties of a drug, and that you understand what the endpoints are, and that there's either precedent or rationale for that, then I can get on a journey of drug development of that with you. Um, and then epidemiology in some sense of a commercial case. Um, but I thought that was really eye opening, right? Because I was wrestling with this as a newcomer in development, younger in my career, and he got it very, very quickly. So there are generalist skills to be developed for sure. I think the other way I think about what you asked, though, is zoom in, zoom out. So as a specialist, can you zoom in and get into the details of a program, and see tiny changes in reticulocyte hemoglobin or something as a hematologist that others didn't notice because it was, quote, still normal, and then zoom out and give that context. Uh, I think the other forming thing that I learned was when I was interviewing at Pharma. I met with a senior leader there, and I asked what success looked like, and he said, "I can tell where you are in your progression by how you answer questions, and whether you answer them at a project level, a program or department level, or an enterprise level." And those are really fundamentally different. And if you once you think that once you've heard that and it sinks in for you, you can hear that in the way people answer questions. And you've got to show up at the level you're at or want to be at. So how do you zoom in and do reticulocyte hemoglobin and then zoom all the way out and tell the board why it matters? So that's a fun place to exercise that you can do as a specialist.
Yeah, wow. What a great example. Darren, there's a couple of sections I've already taken notes in. I'm going to go back and listen to the podcast again because I want to make sure I get a chance to really process that information. Oh, I got one other question. Your ongoing clinical practice at Boston Children's Hospital, how does still having your hands-on work that you're doing inform the way you lead, the way that you prioritize things from a drug development perspective, and the way you view the future of drug development?
I don't know that it quite does those things, but I'll tell you what it does do and how it's helped me. I think I maintained my practice at Boston Children's initially for selfish reasons. It's part of my identity. I needed to do it. I wanted to do it. At this point, I do it because I really enjoy it. And it helps me sprint sometimes 7 days a week, but sometimes five. But I know that I get at least 4 or 5 hours on Friday mornings to do what I love to do, fill my cup again, make a difference in an individual patient's life in a moment, and then plug back in. So that has just worked for me. What working in that environment working in that environment taught me a lot about leadership. I didn't know it was teaching me that at the time. But you are running teams that are interdisciplinary where you don't have authority and you need to learn to influence. And you learn to educate for the sake of influencing, especially as a pediatrician, right? I'm teaching parents what they need to know to make a decision that we think together is right for their kid. All of those skills play out on industry and team leadership, and in terms of educating to influence. So I took a lot from that. And I've also been lucky. I'm very well supported at the hospital. So I work within a center I have some physician partners, I have nurse practitioners and schedulers and coordinators. I was very nervous to be a part-time doc. Like, who really wants a part-time doc? But I don't feel that way. I feel I'm working within an area where I have expertise that's pretty deep. I'm very well supported if there are other issues. As we talked about earlier, I'm really comfortable saying I don't know. That's still true, and getting help and support when I need it. So if I thought I wasn't doing it well, I wouldn't do it anymore. But so far, so good. It's been really good for me. I do think it keeps me sharper on complex medical decision making and risk benefit analysis. So I can pretty well interact with a physician in industry and pretty quickly guess if they came to industry very quickly out of fellowship or whether they practiced for a while before they came, because that's a muscle that takes some time to develop and you lose it in industry. Mine was pretty developed when I came, and I think I maintain it. So I feel stronger there when it comes to giving guidance to programs or talking to KOLs or talking to regulators.
Oh, I love that. That's a great perspective, and thank you for doing that work still, even on a part-time basis. I don't think any parent who needs your advice and your guidance, would look at it any differently than with a big thank you. So I know we're so appreciative of your continued practice in that as well. And I don't know about you, Darren. This has been really an informative episode for me. I have learned a ton, and Cameron have continued to grow in respect for you and for the work that you're doing. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your time with us. Audience, we will place some additional information in the show notes. You can read more about the work Cellarity is doing. Cameron and his team are making a really big impact. But Cameron, we just want to say thank you for joining us today on Thoroughly Thriving. It has been a pleasure and honor.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And as always, as we remember here on Thoroughly Thriving, we will only continue. If we work as one, we will win as one. Thank you for joining us today for another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to share it with those in your world. If you'd like to learn more about the Thorough Group, please go to thoroughgroup.com. And remember that we will all remain thoroughly thriving if we continue to work as one and win as one.